kindergarten. Rob Wilson, technician.
Phyllis Davis, Board Administrative Assistant.
Mary Weinberg, board member.
Mike Morosky, board member. Input from all of our colleagues inserted in. We've had a lot of great discussions in public session with the full board, and we are almost finished, assuming that at the next full board meeting we'll actually be finished with this rewriting of the bylaws. So I'm going to turn it over to General Counsel for an update on where we are today.
Thanks. We sent out to board members and also included in the board docs for today the most recent versions of all the bylaws, including the changes that the board has moved to green in the last 3 board meetings. So I think we're almost there. There's a few other topics, and then the other thing we have to do after the board has made all its changes is I think the board has approved Ms. Bolton's reorganization of the bylaws. So we'll do that again. We'll wait to do that, I think, until all the language is settled, and so that we don't confuse anybody.
Yep.
But other than that, I think we're very close.
Awesome, thank you. And I share the same opinion. I think everybody's on board with reorganizing them as well. Ms. Bolton or Ms. Weinberg, any comments on where we are today with the bylaws? Ready to go?
Good.
All right, awesome. How about that? That will be an enormous achievement. We're going to have a big old party at the policy committee when that's done. We will host this meeting at 7 p.m. at Mecklenburg Gardens. All right, so the next piece, we have a policy 1100, which is district organization. This was assigned to Policy and Equity Committee at the August 7th, 2023 board meeting, and I believe my colleague Ms. Bolton assigned it. And so to kick things off, if you don't mind, Ms. Bolton, I'll kick it to you to remind folks how this ended up here, and then we can see if General Counsel has anything to add before we start chatting.
Great. We're talking about item 1.
Yeah.
And just to correct the record, although my chair is seldom ever mistaken.
Oh no.
I think it was the vice president that actually did the assignment, and I was thankful that he did, so it would not necessarily be coming only from me, but I think the board is interested in
You're right.
the discussion regarding district organization. I know we've mentioned this a number of times over the last year, both in policy, but also before the whole board. Certainly with the changes that occurred with the arrival of a new superintendent and a kind of a, fresh eyes and also a new, for all intents and purposes, a very much new leadership team. And also us adopting, at least in this particular year that is finished, adopting the concept of, rather than using the norm for Ohio, which is superintendents, deputy superintendents, assistant superintendents, instead we have adopted the approach that Superintendent Wright brought to us, which is this idea of chiefs, which also, as I have mentioned before, is a particular term of art for a particular approach to leadership and management that is different for us and new for us. At any rate, also in relationship to some of the suggestions about how we move forward and into this wonderful new school year, some things that maybe needed to be addressed. And the board is familiar with those items that perhaps needed to be addressed, as is the superintendent, and that was shared, and certainly the public knows some of those great things that have happened as a result. of the new superintendent. And she's only got about a couple more weeks where we can keep saying new superintendent instead of just our superintendent. But I think looking at those things that have been very accomplished, and I think most of that is around instructional issues and challenges. It's been of interest to me, and at least on a couple of occasions in public session, interest to certain members of the board to see how we can best organize ourselves. So the issue becomes philosophically the dispute, if it will, or a discussion or about who does have control of the district organization. And that goes into the relationship between the board and the superintendent and treasurer, particularly. It also goes into who organizes the executive staff and leadership team versus for what purpose is the district organized. And so that's why I had mentioned it in other sessions, and Vice President Craig was nice enough to assign this to policy because I think Member Jones said it seems to be a policy issue. So that's why it's here and why we want to discuss it.
Great. Ms. Weinberg, do you have anything?
I don't have anything to add, just thanking Board Member Bolton. I do agree it's an opportunity to kind of look over the chart, look over the different positions and look over the differences, and especially with the name change as well. So I would be open to take anything into consideration.
Before I make comments, let's see if Mr. Hoying has anything to add. Yeah, I didn't think, so for me,
That's a difficult position.
for me,
Welcome to the middle.
yeah, right. Which is kind of where I think I'm going to end up as well on this, because I'm more than happy to have this in this committee. I think it is probably the right place considering we have the policy 1100. I guess for me, I don't know how comfortable I am discussing the actual organizational chart in here. I am comfortable discussing the policy and looking at the policy. I don't know what to recommend as changes. I'm happy to obviously entertain anything and chat about it and take it back to the full board. Interestingly, in the policy, it refers to the superintendent as the chief executive officer of the district already. So, if we wanted to excise that, I suppose we could. And then as far as all the new positions, I mean, letter B on here seems to imbue the superintendent with the authority to do that. Again, I'm fine with discussing whatever. I would need help understanding if it is really this committee's job, however, to dig into the actual organizational chart of the district. And those are my comments. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm happy to discuss the policy in here. I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting necessarily that the chart itself be discussed. We've discussed it in other session. And whatever we do, I'm going to assume that on this board, it would be a close vote one way or the other. But I do think that we should discuss with council, and I'm sure council is carrying forward in part the administration's position on what this might mean, but I would like to discuss the policy as it pertains to the district organization, because I think the public needs to know who actually is in charge of the district's organization versus management.
My question would be, do you have, as I was saying, in here it refers to the superintendent as the CEO, and this was done in 2018. So that seems like a logical place to start. If you were, I don't want to, I'm not dumb enough to put words in people's mouth, but would you suggest that we excise that?
No, not at all.
Okay. Do you have suggestions for this policy?
I think the policy as it stands does us service.
Okay.
The board is mentioned as
Okay.
often as the superintendent is.
Okay.
And the purpose of the district organization is to pursue and achieve the goals of the board representing the community that owns the district.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a one-person job.
Right.
It's one thing to have the superintendent, and I've said this to the superintendent, and I'm sorry she's not here, but she always has been very loyal about being at these things, so I don't want to make use of the fact she's not here, because she's very eloquent and articulate about what she believes to be the power, and we spent a year with the Great City Schools finding out ways to make the superintendent more powerful, the treasurer less powerful, and the board almost non-existent. But I think that's editorial comment, sorry. But I do think that the policy as it stands provides that this is not a one-person shop. The policy as it is written says the purpose of the district organization. And I would, if there's a way to separate the idea of this district organization versus the executive team, I think that might be a significant thing to do. Because this person, this is my 51st year in education, whether a teacher or a board member or a union president. Nobody has spent more time protecting superintendents from themselves and also from the community than I have. So I'm not trying to lessen the power of the superintendent or the executive branch. One of the reasons I think we got a person in from the outside for fresh eyes and muscular behavior about how this place gets run. I'm there. But what I will not do is in my fourth term, the end of my fourth term, sit here and watch the community become less powerful or the board less powerful about how the district looks and is run. And so I think if there's something unclear here, it's not that superintendent is a chief executive officer. Of course, I hate that term. I hate it when this treasurer uses it as chief financial officer, because I think there's a long history of superintendents and treasurers and whatever historically. That's just being old. That's old school, and I think there's great pride in those terms that are not nearly as significant as executive officer, which I see as a business term, and I'm not too excited about. But my point is maybe that we need some clarification as to what this means.
I just had a quick
Thank you.
question. Board Member Bolton, what would you suggest then? So for that sentence where it says the superintendent should be the chief executive officer, of the district.
I agree. That sentence should stand. But chief executive officer does not mean that as chief executive officer, she becomes or he becomes more important than the duly elected or the last say or the conduit of the community's interest. The superintendent as chief executive officer, she's still or he's still, or the chief financial officer, to whom do they report? They report to the board. And the vision, mission, and goals of the district are determined by the elected officials. That's been true for 196 years. Actually, it's been true for 210 years. And you cannot have one change that now kind of puts into question. I think, too, there's a whole issue here that I think everybody achieves more when we are working together and everybody recognizes everybody else's power and authority and role. It's like an old theater person in me, is everybody has to know their role. And I think the board's role is being very confused, not because of the superintendent, but because of the time we've spent with Great City Schools and also this, what I call the urban legend, that somehow the board / the community became more powerful. They're supposed to run their schools. Not the day-to-day operation, not management. I noticed in the parking lot today, on those signs where administration parks, they call it, we haven't changed the signs yet, it's still called management team. I'm not questioning the management of this district. Now we're calling executive leadership, okay. But please don't forget who's in charge of representing the community, and that the community owns these schools. I don't want to diminish the superintendent's role at all.
I'm wondering if, and this is why I was thinking moving these things around might be good. I'm wondering if, and feel free to say I'm wrong, if that policy
Never.
12, yes, no, thank you. Well, careful. if that policy 1210, the board superintendent relationship might be the policy to discuss this, because I see what you're saying, and you know, we'll report this out to the full board in the minutes, but with the district organization policy, if there really aren't too many suggestions for that one, I do feel that 1210 kind of comes out of this conversation, or because I'm looking at it right now and I feel like we're sort of talking about that one as well. But you tell me, again, like if you want to move to 1210 or if you want to stay on the district organization, because if we're not going to affect the policy today, we might be able to find something in 1210 that to affect or change.
I mean, I think it would be useful, just as there's a few people that might be listening or participating, or for the record,
Sure.
I do think we should have general counsel bring the administration's view to this 1110 or whatever,
Okay.
so that we even know what
Sure.
that is. I mean, I appreciate the time you just gave me to express
Yeah, no, yeah.
my interest.
Always. And also, just so folks know, because it came up, the superintendent is at a school.
Right.
Yes.
And so I just wanted to, yeah, that's why she's not here today. She'll be here at finance committee though. So, so yeah, sorry.
Sure. So carefully, I will, with respect to the line about the superintendent being the chief executive officer, this isn't the only place that appears.
Mhm.
That's also in the definitions section of the bylaws that we've been working through, defining the superintendent, and this definition is actually consistent with the superintendent's contract as well, which the board has agreed to, that the superintendent shall be the chief executive and administrative officer of the school district, with responsibility to direct and assign teachers, principals, and other employees of the district to perform all duties incident to the leadership of the school district and to carry out duties and directives prescribed by the board. That's also consistent with 3319.01, which says the superintendent shall be the executive officer of the board, shall direct and assign teachers and other employees of the district. So there's some statutory and board policy basis, I think, for the role of the superintendent here. I will also say, and I agree with Ms. Bolton to say that this policy could be read and certainly establishes a role for the superintendent and also establishes a role for the board. And that's backed up by statute as well. So as you know, every hire that the superintendent makes, every promotion is all of those are approved in a superintendent's report that have to be voted on by the board, and the board has discretion, and certainly a vote implies that you have a role in determining what the organization of the school district looks like. So in my opinion, again, I think there's some intentional vagueness here because there is a role for both the board and the superintendent. Is that
And you can
hedging
run
in a
for
good
president
middle
now.
ground? Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
So can we bring up 1210, policy 1210, I think. Interestingly and unsurprisingly, the last time this was revised was on the same exact day as the district organization in 2018. Are you good to move on to that one, or do you want to?
I would like, just for the record, that the policy as it stands be read so that it's for the record. I think we've highlighted a particular part of it, but if we could read the full policy, since it's a short one, thank God. You think with the brevity, it would be clearer, but is it possible for general counsel to read the whole policy?
For
Mr.
sure.
Chair?
Go ahead.
Okay.
And we're going to wrap this part up by 9:30
Yes.
because we want to. We may want to have an executive
This will all
session
be-
item at the end.
Exactly.
So
Thank you.
The organization of the district shall be designed to meet the objectives, vision, mission, and goals set by the board. Ensure clear lines of authority and responsibility and define each position with clarity. Superintendent shall be the chief executive officer of the district. The superintendent shall define and establish those administrative positions required to implement the educational system and program of learning established by the board. In each case, the board will approve the broad purpose and function of the position in harmony with state law and regulations. Responsibility shall flow clearly from the superintendent through the administrative staff to the operational personnel It shall be the responsibility of the superintendent to determine the need for and define operational requirements sufficient to ensure the smooth functioning of the district. Maintenance of an efficient, skilled operational staff is essential to the effective performance of the system. It is the board's intent to maintain an operational and technical staff with a high level of competence. On occasion, the superintendent may find it necessary to recommend to the board the employment of specialists or consultants to maintain or support programs implemented by the district in areas requiring specialized knowledge. These positions will be considered by the board on the merits of their potential contribution to the district and the specific conditions of the stated contract or agreement.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you for asking, and thank you, General Counsel, for reading it for us. The next one is also quite short, 1210. This is regarding board superintendent relationship. Curious if anyone would like to kick this off, or if General Counsel, since you're kind of on a tear right now, just kind of outline what this says for us here. I mean, basically it says that we set policies and the superintendent enacts them and has latitude to determine the best method to enact it. Is there anything else in here that needs to be highlighted aside from that one primary sort of central point? I mean, it says a few other things, but that one.
I think it establishes the board as responsible for to pass policy, and then the superintendent to essentially run the plays, to establish procedures to implement those policies.
And then the one thing that's a little specific that is called out, of course, is that the superintendent is the chief representative. There's that word again that's in the policy, the chief representative of us when we're doing negotiation. Yes, Ms. Weinberg. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right, so open up. Ms. Bolton, do you have anything on this one?
No, I don't think there needs to be any change to either to justify or explain the idea that the board can determine who will report to them. Superintendent doesn't determine who reports to the board. And I don't think that's ever been in dispute.
No.
I think too that the board meeting its obligations within the first policy and this policy, the board has a role to play. It is not an absent board. And it is not fully only run by the executive. If that were true, there wouldn't be a board, we wouldn't be voted, and the community wouldn't have to be asked occasionally to pay taxes, because somebody could just get money somehow. So I don't think either policy requires a change. I do think that the second policy, where they're talking about specialized whatever,
yeah.
I remember when we put that in, and that I think specifically was to justify, and especially for our union representatives that are here, that was to justify us doing hiring, especially in the computer and technology fields, where we were going to be going outside kind of the civil service gradations, if you will, because that it was such a competitive market at the time, and so that might be. But again, I don't think anything in either of these policies. Heck, how long have I been in and out of policy? I don't think either of these policies are bad. I think they, because I think they establish that the board exists and has statutory responsibilities and certain responsibilities to the point Member Weinberg points about not only oversight, but also, again, the district exists to accomplish the vision, mission, and goals of the board because we are expressing the wants and needs of the community. So I don't know that any change has to be made. We might just have to fight it out as to who's willing to, and how that splits the board as to the degree of executive power that this board wants to give a superintendent. Or not.
So, yeah, I mean, it sounds like, it's a good idea to just lift these up regardless for the full board when we present the minutes. And you are correct, for what it's worth, about the specialized position, because the policy committee that did this was you, me, and Miss Bates.
That's right.
It was the first, yeah, and I was, Miss Bates was the chair, I remember. Do you have anything to add to? Okay. So I think it's good, and I appreciate lifting these up again. I think the full board discussion, and I think your last point is probably the right point. Like, we'll see where, yeah, that all sort of nets out. I think that's right.
And that'll be a really big decision.
I think that's right. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you, General Counsel, for getting this all together for us and giving your opinion and being so great, you and your whole team. The next two that we have that we're going to take together because they're related is 6152, student fees, fines, and charges, and 6152.01, specifically waiver of school fees. Ms. Weinberg, you placed this one on here however many months ago that was. It seems like eons ago. I believe you did, yes. I have a shockingly good memory. Mr. Hoying has a better memory than all of us, though, and no, he doesn't. There it is. Let's hear it. That is correct. And highlighting it and making sure that people.
It is on.
Yep. And making sure that people know because of the very irresponsible news story that came out regarding how CPS doesn't, let people even walk at graduation. So yeah, just some clarity on that. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, we're really, I think, glad that the board is taking this issue up. The administration has also been doing kind of a comprehensive review of what we do on student fees. It's been a discussion at ELT for the last 2 meetings. We're still looking at it, and I don't know that we're prepared to make any kind of final recommendation to the board. I think preliminary, the superintendent and I think administration is examining whether or not the fees that are charged, and there are sort of student fees that are charged to all families across the board. That's consistent with state law. The district is certainly allowed to charge not for textbooks, but for sort of consumables, workbooks and other things. That's consistent with state law. There are exceptions for students who are free and reduced lunch and not in a financial position to be able to pay. But I think the question is that we're looking at is whether there's equity here, whether all schools are benefiting from school fees kind of consistently. So we're still looking at that. I think there will still be a role for student fees, even if we recommend some changes to the sort of base student fee, because there are still charges that students receive for damage to property, lost or late library books, devices, extras like student trips and things like that. So student fees will be a part of, they wouldn't be going away altogether. I think one of the reasons, just to add a little bit more context, that it came up especially last year is, you'll recall during COVID, the district took a position that not that it would cancel student fees or stop charging students, but that the consequences of not paying student fees would be suspended during COVID. So in 2020, in 2021, and in 2022, if you were a student that owed fees, they didn't go off of your account. They remained on your account, but the consequences of having unpaid fees, like graduation, participating in some of those graduation or other senior events, those were all you were allowed to participate regardless of whether you. And the reason we did that is because some parents had already paid fees, and so it wasn't, we weren't necessarily going to refund fees that had already been paid, but we didn't want students who hadn't paid fees to suffer any consequences during that time. 2023, some of those consequences started to come back. There was an article written, there was some confusion in the schools, and so we want to make sure we get that right this year. Jen may have stuff to add as well.
So we're in the process of gathering data so that you can use that to help inform whatever policy changes you would like to do. But there are fees that are charged by the district to all students, and then there's fees that are charged from each school depending on their programmatic needs. The waiving above and beyond the free and reduced lunch rules is a little nebulous, and so it's probably an area that we could need to firm up quite a bit. And so we're looking at some schools collect significant amounts of money, and they use that to help offset the fact that they don't get title funds, so to speak. I did have a conversation with the treasurer huddle yesterday morning. Cleveland, Columbus, and Toledo, none of them charge student fees except for Career Tech. And so we talked about the economics of how much time and effort we take chasing down uncollected fees and whether we're spending more money to collect money. And so we're putting together some analysis. We'll bring it back to policy committee or finance, whichever you prefer, to help guide that change.
And I just had a quick question, and I like that you all are going to look at that, because I know with some schools with like the pay to play, for example, they're charging students. When you look at the free or reduced lunch, I'm not sure how that is relating to the pay to play. So I'm not sure if it is even helping them. They are still charging them, and if they're unable to pay that fee, then it obviously goes against them. So I would be interested to hear how that could maybe be helped.
So I can say legally, the charges that are related to the curriculum that related to they have to be waived for a free and reduced lunch student. An extracurricular fee, which I know some of our schools charge, that would not necessarily have to be waived by law. I believe there are accommodations
So I
made.
was going to ask
Yeah.
next. Consistent accommodation that being made, because I would think that that would bring up some equity issues as well.
I agree. I also agree with Jen that our rules or that are a little nebulous right now. So worth.
Well, that would be interested to see an update on.
Yeah.
So,
Ms. Bowman?
Yeah, as a matter of equity, we should eliminate all fees except for damaged equipment, damaged devices, things where we have established the family and the child and teenager have responsibility for something that we have, the taxpayers have given them. The reason I say that is that clearly more than half of our kids would have trouble paying the fees that half of our kids can pay. So that right there has to be dealt with. Because the very kids that might be the least able to afford, or families afford it, or organize around getting those monies together, are the very kids that need the extracurricular, need the other things that the extra fees pay for. So I think it does need to come back to policy. I think it's very consistent with our equity piece. I'll take that back. Technically, equity would say, yeah, who can afford it gets to pay, and who can't afford it doesn't. That's actual equity. But that is not how we are interpreting to the benefit of our students.
Yeah.
At least in that area, as it pertains to money, how we're interpreting equity. I would think, too, that the amounts of dollars that are collected and the discrepancy between and among schools and school administrations makes it very confusing for everybody. So I'd like to see the dollar part of it go back to finance briefly when you get that information. I think that would be helpful, but I think the whole thing needs to come back to policy. Yeah, Jen.
Sorry.
I'd like to request that the student fee policy, if that's the direction we're going to go in, that it be considered in conjunction with fundraising and crowdfunding policies, because I can see where some schools that collect a significant amount of school fees are going to want to put more pressure on fundraising, and we need to, with the crowdfunding that's happening in the country, we need to have some very firm policies around what that money's allowed to be spent on, and the nebulousness of that. So just if we could just consider it in conjunction together.
I feel like this is the second or third time we've had that kind of conversation, if not more. Yeah. Weinberg? Bolton, good? Good? Awesome. All right. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Ms. Weinberg, for bringing that to our attention. This has been a great year. I feel like everything that's been added to this agenda all year has been really important and good stuff. Thanks to you two. My job is just to remember how it got on the agenda.
And you're doing very well.
Thank you. Sometimes I have to text him, like, hey, what are we doing? Okay, great. Moving along, wow. So 7250, this is amazing. Holy cow. Policy 7250, commemoration of school facilities. This is regarding new school, naming our new schools that we have. And this came up in this committee a couple times, and Ms. Bolton, since I've been on this board, and I'm very grateful for this, has been consistent in reminding us that we have very few facilities named for women. We are unique, and we're all proud of the fact that most of our buildings are named for people, Cincinnatians, that have done really important things. We have a number of schools named after Black leaders from our community, including the school my son will start at on Monday, Hayes Porter. Very exciting, two very influential people. Miss Porter was the first African-American principal in the district at Harriet Beecher Stowe School. I'll stop with my little history lesson. I'm starting to feel like Miss Bolton. I've been on this board for a couple terms. Yeah, I'm on a roll so far. And George Hayes was the first Black member of the House of Representatives, maybe, in the state of Ohio, I think. Either way, Dan's going to go check, and I'm going to move on before he proves me wrong, and we'll just assume that I did okay. So we brought this up because we have a couple schools. Lighthouse, we're going to look to rename, and there's Bramble. I don't know if we're keeping that. We haven't even talked about that, but that's another new or reinvigorated building in our portfolio. And so this conversation started here. This policy, for the edification of the folks watching or people in the room who do not know, essentially says it's up to us. And how we do that process is sort of designed by us. And I believe it's kind of started. If there's an update there, I thought the superintendent had got some of this moving in Madisonville with the Lighthouse School. But I'm open up to my colleagues. Ms. Bolton has her hand, so we'll go to Ms. Bolton and then Ms. Weinberg.
I think the superintendent's gotten it rolling a bit on for Bramble. And then also, I think you brought, Mr. Chair, the Lighthouse issue. I would also add that as we are in the last few years of our second century, it is not a bad idea looking back. First of all, none of the people for whom our schools are named, and the research has been done, are folks who need to be removed from those buildings, because they are all wonderful people and did great things, actually quite progressive things in their day. So it's not like some of the institutions around that have had to change names. We don't need to change the names that are for people. But I do think it would be an interesting thing, as I hope we have a priority of celebrating our bicentennial. And I know people have great affection for schools that are named for streets or whatever, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to celebrate the most recent century and of leadership and contribution to CPS, and think about, to your point, whether it's women or whomever, some of these schools that are named or have such an, maybe it's one thing to be named for a neighborhood. I think I can live with that. But if it's a street or something else, it seems like it should be a person that we could bring into our future and part of our celebration, which I think is going to be huge as the oldest school district in the previous Northwest Territory. I think this is something we should be comfortable trying to do. And ironically, as you pointed out, I think at the board meeting or whatever it was, there's also the interest of having perhaps a name change that got resisted 2 years ago by a particular school that we were trying to change the name. But I personally do believe that Governor Gilligan needs to somehow be part of that updating of bringing people into this century and naming our schools. So I think that's going to be a resolution that's going to be forwarded perhaps sooner than the Bramble name, and I think that would be good. So again, a World War II person, a professional teacher, a person that after the governorship decided to be on a school board, a native Cincinnatian. So that's something to be thinking about. But Lighthouse and Bramble and whatever school, and previously it was CDA that we talked about because it had no name. And I know we have talked about, not recently, but in the last 3 years, talked about making sure that our CDA is actually something that's statewide competitive as a digital school, and I still don't know why we're not doing that. Remember that?
We talked about that a lot. You know,
Yes.
the Governor Gilligan thing, I don't often get too frustrated. I try not to anyway, but like I thought we had settled on that years
I did
ago.
too. Just like East-West Montessori.
So yeah, whatever we need to, I don't know what we need to do for that. I'm looking to Dan, because I thought we had like settled that for CDA, that we were going to rename it Gilligan and that we would, you know, market it, we're not calling it the Gilly. We're not going to change the name if that's what it's going to be called. So scratch it.
Not in the record.
I got to hop on the Gilly. Oh, now I'm saying it. Did we?
Actually,
I thought so do we just need a resolution? Can we just do that and lay down and bring the thunder at the next board meeting and be like, here's a resolution to name CDA, like, and just pull the trigger
just do
and
it.
just be done with it?
My recollection was that we had tried to reach out to some members of the Gilligan family.
We did. That's
Oh.
right.
Wasn't that?
I
where
know
it's-
the answer.
Okay,
I know the answer. Someone, unfortunately, after we had reached this consensus, said, well, we'll reach out to the Gilligan family, which, by the way, his daughter was the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare, and the governor of Kansas,
When his
no less.
family's all over
And
this
the
town.
family is everywhere in this town and successful. I think we made them, certainly not the board, but somebody in the administration decided that they wanted some money. That's how it got.
Say it again.
ended.
Say what was that
Yes.
last piece? What was that last piece? What was the last piece?
Someone asked for some money.
Who, from the family?
Stan! That is true.
Who asked for money? Sorry,
It was a previous board, so
no, I remember and who asked for money?
good shout. Phyllis!
Well, okay, back to the present
No,
day.
that's absolutely true.
So
But we really need
Let's
to
revisit.
deal with this.
but back to the present day.
Years ago
Can we propose a resolution though? Can we just be done with this? Because this
Yes.
keeps coming up. And I'm in the mood to just be done with it. So, Mr. Hoying, we're going to have a resolution to name CDA. The Governor Gilligan, obviously his full name,
John Jay.
School of Gilly. That's not true. Can we have a resolution that says something like that? And it would be something to bring up. We can bring it up. If people, we'll let them know we're doing it. I mean, this
No,
conversation went on, and it's
ridiculous.
just never happened. And I don't know
I
what
can't believe he came here. You know, and I want to say something just on a personal, not about Governor Gilligan, although he and my dad worked together and whatever. And he's a great man and a good man. But I just a thing from 2 summers ago when the Aiken family were in town. They're spread all over the country, and they came to see the new building. And if they had not yet seen, they were here for a burial. And this naming of buildings is really, really, really important. And it says who we are. And it's great value to the families, whether it's a building or a room or whatever. We don't mean to take this at all lightly. And it's a big deal. And he deserves a big deal.
He deserves it.
And I appreciate your putting it back on the schedule. And
Just want to get it done. Yeah, and Governor Gilligan will go down in history as having the honor of being the last white man
You
that
got it,
any
baby.
building in this district is named after.
White
So it is
White
written, so it is done. Congratulations,
White
Gilligan
White.
family, until you open the Morosky School. So moving, well, the Polish language school next door to Fairview. They can fight. No, okay.
Polish.
Sorry.
German Polish
That was for the
language
social studies
school.
teacher. Sorry. Okay, that was fun. Okay, please reflect that in the minutes, Phyllis. The Murawski School of Polish Language. I'm gonna get 100% of my father's will now. Okay.
So much for your brother.
Well, anyhow, okay, so commemoration, we're good. And do we know, is there, I don't expect anybody here to have this update, so I apologize for even asking, but if you do, didn't the superintendent launch start socializing this idea for Lighthouse in Madisonville, that we were going to be,
Not
do
Lighthouse.
you know, and again, I don't
It
expect
was
anybody,
Bramble.
no, it was Lighthouse, because
Really?
that's what
Okay.
started this.
Yeah, you brought
Lighthouse
up
started this,
Yeah, you brought
and then
that up.
Bramble came after.
Right, but I think
And I think too,
confused. I guess we.
No, and again, I don't expect anybody here to know, I just was
and in good
curious.
judgment, step back from that because of all the other things that were happening about Bramble and whatever, that, you know, that caused a stir. Because when you change a name, it's always kind of weird.
From Bramble to something else. Yeah. Well, Lighthouse, we have to change. So that one to me is like top of mind. We have to change that name. We should have changed it a year ago. No one at Lighthouse cares, but like we should be changing that
Something
name.
that's been brought to my attention too is that I know Member Weinberg has some great names, some suggestions, but something I didn't know, that, you know, how John P. Parker School in Madisonville, John P. Parker's widow lived in Madisonville.
Yeah.
And was, so it's kind of, there's so much great history in this town.
Yeah. He wrote a great book too. John P. Parker. I've been to his house. Anyway, so we have this. We know it's on us. So I guess what I would like to do is at the next board meeting when we're reviewing the minutes is bring this up, get an update on Lighthouse and Bramble, because as far as chain of events, we have Gilligan, which is years past overdue. We're gonna have a resolution and see what people say. Then Lighthouse, because again, we do have an agreement with them, and no one at Lighthouse cares. I've talked with them; they're not upset about any of this, but there is an agreement that says we would use the name for a little bit and then move on. Just so it's not confusing to their donors that are, you know, donating to the facility. So, and then Bramble, unless people say hands off, which I'm
I'm
fine
think
with.
That would be great for the community
Yeah.
to rename it. It was in that stir of events.
Yeah.
It clouded some issues.
Okay.
Didn't need to be clouded.
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. Great. Then the only other thing, if there out of the two folks who are watching, if you would like to address this committee, you're more than welcome to. Just raise your hand and tell us what you want to chat about. Contact info if you want a response. You have 2 minutes, and let us know your school affiliation. And you have a couple minutes to do that if you want to. And while we're waiting for that, and then we do have one item that we will recess into executive session for at the end. But is there other business from either of my colleagues? I don't believe I have any, but I'll think while you, nothing from. All right, we'll give you, she's going to go, and then if you think of anything, Ms. Bolton.
I did reach out to General Counsel, and it is my understanding that in the next few weeks, there will be at least, there'll be 3, but more likely 2 young people who are war refugees from Ukraine that will be moving into our district. They'll be with the Catholic Church down on Sycamore. And the issue is to make sure whatever policies we have, or whatever adjustments or exceptions or what have you for enrollment and for transportation, these are war victims and suffering from certainly the trauma of that. And they've talked about a number of schools. One is a teenager, and who initially they thought would be going to one of our Catholic high schools, but that's probably not going to happen. So they might be ending up with us, and the other's an elementary kid. And somebody suggested like AWL or whatever, because Russian is taught there, but these kids are actually deprogramming themselves from speaking Russian, which is interesting. And so in the neighborhood, in the address that they may have as a refugee family, the mother / aunt, one is her nephew and two of these kids are her kids. We may have to, have a kind of and the exception might be which school to send them. They have to be sent somewhere that is aware of their background and situation. And what a great opportunity for our students and teachers to help in whatever way possible. So that would be something. I don't know if that is a policy question, that one. And then the other new thing is the couple of letters the very few letters we got about transportation. Did want to follow up on whatever one parent referenced some rule about not using a phone, like it was policy that the children can't have phones on the bus or use phones on
Not
the
our
bus.
policy.
Yeah.
That's not our policy.
And they said it was policy, and I didn't recall. So those are my two new things. But I would appreciate if the community, the committee feels strongly about those kids and whatever we can do to help this war against.
So I would say strongly that we need no exception from policy. The students, once arrived, will be welcomed. It's not an unusual circumstance for us. We have, as I said, we have an ESL team that can find an appropriate place for them and appropriate supports if they have English language needs. And then considering their living situation, they would likely qualify under Project Connect. Which helps to arrange transportation and all kinds of. So I think we need no exception or other policy that this would be students that would be welcome to the. Yeah, no special. I mean, we can make sure that they are welcomed and have everything they need.
That's very reassuring. Again, hitting the history piece, you just have to go to our own local Holocaust and Humanity Museum and recognize the role CPS has played again and again and again. If you go previous century from World War II, whether it's those folks that have left from enslavement in CPS, we have proud history. So thank you, General Counsel. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me talk about that.
No, not at all. I appreciate it. Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but related again back to the Polish school. My family lives in Krakow now. Most of the young ones do. The older Morawskis are still live out in the sticks. But Krakow sent in like 2 weeks when all that started. It's interesting when you go over there now, every single building that has a Polish flag, so government typically, but any building that has a Polish flag has a Ukrainian flag right next to it.
Have been
Right next to it.
Most welcoming of all the countries and nations.
It's fresh on a lot of their minds still. That is not ancient history.
That's not ancient.
And along those lines too, in my day job, we do a lot of work with new Americans, immigrants, and refugees, and we have a crisis level ton of Mauritanians coming to Cincinnati, just showing up, hundreds at a time, just showing up. And one thing, I just need to say this for the administration that's here, for my colleagues too, but administration, big time, and certainly our union representative that's in the House, because we should be proud of this. So I work with, I think most folks know, all the social services in the county, and we have a lot of immigrants and refugees coming here, a lot. And it is very difficult. And, the myriad amounts of places they got to go and lines they got to stand in and services they got to fill out forms for. One of the more enjoyable or easier experiences for them has been getting kids to school. And I think that's notable. And I wish I would have brought this up sooner because people need to hear that, which is always nice to hear that the folks who are most, I hate the word vulnerable, but it's what it is in our community, that we've been really, really welcoming and made it as easy as possible on them. So kudos to everybody for that, and thanks for bringing that up. I don't have anything. Do we have anyone that wants to talk? Okay. Ms. Weinberg?
Maybe if a child can't use a phone.
So
look into that or what?
Yeah, please.
just to read from our policy, so the cell phones are not prohibited. A student may, but this is reading from board policy 5136, cellular telephones and electronic communication devices possessed by students A student may possess a cellular telephone or other electronic communication device, tablet, laptop, etc., in school, on school property, or after school activities and at school-related functions, provided that during instructional time, the cellular telephone and ECD remains off and stored out of view. So that's sort of the baseline policy. The policy also shares with parents that bringing a cell phone or other electronic device to school is sort of at your own risk. The district's not necessarily responsible for that. And the disruptive use of an electronic device like a phone could be cause for discipline for the student, even on a bus, could be cause for confiscation of the device. But we tell schools they are not to, like, you can't prohibit phones. If that's been confused by one of our bus vendors, I'd be happy to follow up on that. So I haven't seen the letter, but I'm glad to follow up.
The superintendent responded very well to this particular family, and it's somewhere under, the first name is Jonathan.
Right, and another comment was a policy, I guess that was in place for restricting a parent to come pick up their child when a bus is canceled. They referenced that, and I don't think we have a policy.
We wouldn't know. Our general rule would be that a parent, as long as we confirm it is the parent or an emergency contact, somebody that's allowed to pick up the child, that they would be allowed to pick up the child during the day.
Remember, Golden, I don't know, I think you were adding something, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on it. This is in that letter from the parent, and again, very few letters yesterday, so congratulations on that. But it was very clear there was some sort of prohibition about using a phone and about picking the kid up.
I'm not sure if that's at the school level or.
Yeah, if you want to forward it to us,
Forward
we'll be
that so we
glad.
can
Yeah.
find that letter now, of course. Unless I can't find
have
it.
it, I'll
Can you forward it to, because they need to be reassured, or that we need to find out what vendor or whoever or what administrator is saying something that is confusing.
Good. Good. Great. So nobody wants to talk to us, which is sad. But we are going to recess into executive session to discuss personnel. If somebody would like to make that motion, it was requested that we do this. A second? Or
For a reason.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't say that. Employment of a, public employee or official. Is that the right public employee or official?
Yeah.
It sounds so weird to me every time I hear it. Okay. Recessing, it has been asked that we recess into executive session to discuss the employment of a public employee or official. Do I have a motion? Thank you.
Second.
Then it's a roll call vote, actually.
A roll call, correct.
So Ms. Bolton,
Aye.
Ms. Weinberg,
Yes.
Chair Morosky.
And so we can end the meeting. Thank you all. Or